Welcome and namaste, and thank you for tuning in to this real, raw, and radically unscripted talk show style live stream podcast crossover event of the almost daily production family, whatever you call this almost daily brand. Shout out to any audience members of the Almost Daily Zencast and its various podcasts of many podcast sub-segments, including but not limited to Good Morning Trumptopia, Real, Raw, and Unauthorized Explicit Readings, and all the others. And of course, hello and shout out to all the live stream enthusiasts, either on TikTok or on Twitch. Thank you for tuning in and listening. This is a kind of reboot of the crossover podcast / live stream idea. Live streams are technically very different than podcasts. I will continue to produce the podcast over on the podcast platform the way the podcasts have always been produced. But I think I'm also going to integrate this crossover style business a little bit more often. So welcome to the shenanigans. The live stream will begin shortly. It will then eventually become a permanent podcast episode over on the Sprecher platform, which means you could be watching and or listening to this on many platforms in the end, after the fact. But you can only be watching it live in real time as it's being created in front of you by tuning into either Twitch TV / Mr. Zeppo or TikTok at the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo and finding the live thing. I don't know how that works because I don't really use TikTok very much despite being on it. And that's a whole story we can get into at another time. Welcome to the show. This will be a real, raw, and radically unscripted talk show style episode. It shan't be too terribly long, but I do have a few things I'd like to comment on from our real world recent events that have gone a little out of control, in my humble opinion. And then some thoughts on the meta perspective. Thank you for being here. Brace yourselves, this will get started in just a moment. But first, may I introduce to you, if you've never been here before, to the imaginary sidekick, personal butler, and internationally, intergalactically recognized party co-host, DJ Z, and its newly redacted twin, DJ Z. All of that will be explained. If you're new here, please do smash the follow button and click on over to solo.to / Mr. Zeppo and give yourself a self-guided tour of the many interconnected projects of too many projects that we colloquially call the Zeppoverse brand. Technical issues with the volume control, but here we go, friends. Please stand by. This live stream / podcast hybrid will be getting started soon, which means it'll run at its own unique pace, not quite the luxurious, languid, lounging around pace of live streaming, and not quite the radio, hyper edit cut, super produced version of podcasting. This is not your Grandpappy's podcast, nor is it your Grandpappy's live stream. Just strap in, get ready, lean back, close your eyes, and join us at the center of the theater of your imagination. And let DJ Z make you get up and dance, should the inspiration strike you. The talking and discussing and contemplating part of this podcast will begin shortly. Please, prepare yourself. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good night, and good day to you, friends. Allow myself to reintroduce myself. I am the founder of the imaginary production company that exists entirely, only, and exclusively in my mind. Oh, am I? You know what? I just realized something. I never set up the microphone correctly for this delightful, experimental, technologically challenged crossover episode. I forgot to add one thing. Please stand by. There we go. Greetings, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and good night to you. And now, this should sound as it was intended to sound. Thank you for tuning in, friends. DJ Zed, you can go ahead and ease on out. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, and this is test, check 1 2 1 2. Are we sounding good? I actually haven't put on the sound monitor headsets yet. Hello. Oh, of course not. Good afternoon, friends, and thank you for being here. Please excuse the bizarre technical difficulties. I forgot. But hello. Welcome. This is real, raw, and radically unscripted public discourse, podcast, audio, blog, talk show style, live stream crossover. It's being presented on 3 different platforms in 3 different time frames. Well, 2, I guess. Anyways, blah, 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 blah. For those who do not know, I'm a fictional character from a book series you haven't read yet because you have not clicked through on solo.to/Mr. Zeppo to start sampling the various sample books from the multiverse of the book series. It'll all make a lot more sense once you at least go check it out or, lurk it a bit and go, oh, okay, now I realize what's going on in that regard. But as far as the opinions expressed here and hitherto in the past in any of the backlogged episodes, available for you in various ways, but most directly and most efficiently delivered to your ear canals by visiting Sprecher.com and finding the organizational link there for the podcasts of many podcasts. I'll drop that link in chat in just a hot second. Let me dig it up. But I digress. Hello to people on TikTok. I see that Mitchell Giovante recently joined. We've had about 15 viewers drop on through. I cannot tragically track you TikTokers in live real time as you would prefer, as is customary on the TikTok Live, because I'm not streaming from the TikTok app. Shh, don't tell them. They know. They set this up. I'm streaming directly from Streamlabs. In fact, I can show you. This won't make any sense to anybody listening along on the audio-only version, but imagine that you're invited to watch the live stream at some point. We're going to be doing this maybe like once or twice a week, this version of the podcast. And the podcast itself, in its audio-only format, will be coming back to its usual production cycle of pretty much almost daily, right before launching any long-form video game content. It's just a new executive decision that came directly from the top of CTEG Studios' board of directors. Okay, right. This is the Of course, I did all that without a microphone, and I feel like a complete bubkiss. In fact, I feel like I should shut this down and delete all record of it. But you know what? This show is real, raw, and radically unscripted. So there you go. The audience-only portion of the audience. The audience-only portion? No. The audio-only portion of the audience listening to this Unsprecher may not have heard anything that I've just said. Because I switched over and showed on camera, but forgot to add this audio input known as the golden microphone. I jokingly call it that because it is literally a gold-colored microphone. I forgot to add it as an audio feed into every scene here before launching, which was a dumb rookie mistake on my part. But if anything, you can take it as proof. This show is real, raw, and radically unscripted. I'm going to not move from this scene that we're in now for a hot minute so that we don't lose anything that I say. And I'm going to try to remind myself that microphone is not patched into most of any of the other scenes. Welcome. So, the world's on fire. People are either gaslighting themselves in an attempt to gaslight others to not take it seriously and or ignore it and or minimize it and or just blindly accept it. We're teetering on the verge of for the first time in known living memory, like in living history, right? Teetering on the verge of a serious Dust Bowl-like recession / depression. We can call it Dust Bowl 2 if you want, because something's going to happen that's going to equate the literal Dust Bowl that happened. I wouldn't be surprised. It might be more along the lines of like flooding and storms and stuff. Maybe not so much an actual literal Dust Bowl this time around. And all of it is, if you follow the money, tracing back to what appears to be, and I'm no forensic accountant, but I am a concerned member of the public discourse consortium that is openly standing publicly denouncing and protesting the ideological goals, the platform, and the objectives of the Trump administration and its coalition of various disparate at times, but deeply interconnected with their blind faithism rhetoric, groups, the various groups that are affiliated in supporting this individual, who has long proven himself to be exactly what any one of us, and those of us who were warning anybody considering giving him their political support vis-a-vis voting for him the first time or the second time around, precisely what we were concerned with. He's checking off all the boxes, folks. You cannot accuse it of being, you cannot accuse anyone's concern, because there are millions of us under the coalition concept of being opposed to Donald Trump and opposed to his policy agenda and opposed to his overall political shenanigans and opposed to the coalition of ideological constructs that are now, for better or worse, the body politic of what can only be called the Trumptopian movement. And I'm not mimicking anyone's words, folks, because that's the first thing out of everybody's mouth. Whensoever the great Don is criticized, let his followers all utter the exact same script. But I'm none of those things. I didn't vote for Biden. I've never once blindly defended him, I've never once blindly defended any politician in any party in either direction, except for when it's been a blatant ism that is irrational and has nothing to do with the politics involved, right? People often project onto me that which they've been told the enemy must be, right? Whatever it is you've been told to argue about against, I must be that, right?
And very few of you have bothered to really deep dive into my body of work, for I have not just sprung up. And dare I say, I was the first to use the term Trumptopian, and I do not mean it in a belittling way, the way others may mean or intend their coined terminology for those who support and follow Trump. I mean, in as much as that, like, if a person is a member of the Republican Party, they are a Republican. The people who are MAGA, right? There's no good way to conjugate MAGA anyways. A Magonian? What are you going to call that? I don't know. They are just call themselves MAGA, and that's great. But MAGA is not the only group, right? There's other constituencies that overlap. With some of members being members, self-identifying as participants in both. But in other ways, like, not so much. So it's bigger than just MAGA. It's bigger than just... There is a growing coalition of many different disparate groups that retain for themselves a growing overlapping collection of ideologies that are finding a way to merge, whether any of them want to talk about that or not. Because that's one of the things that some of the loudest defenders and apologists on the social media are like least capable of talking about, because they're not prepared and it's not in any of their notes. And I mean this sincerely. When I use the word Trumptopian, I only mean to include all of that which is beyond the narrow scope of just what the individual politician has said and done, but what the larger cornucopia, which is also not a pejorative, it just means a mixed collection of, bound by a singular container, which is roomy enough to contain this mixed collection of. There's a coalition of people with a patchwork collection of different and sometimes not so different ideological constructs. What they have in common is they are following marching orders when it comes to their blind faith, adoration, and irrational defense of what is ultimately inexcusable. If our common bond across that gap, given that until he says so, he has not yet declared himself to not be an American. He has openly claimed out loud, he has literally said to his own followers that he is not a Christian. And that is not up for debate. He's said it quite blatantly, and it's there. It's captured on tape. He's only said it like a rare, I think maybe only the one time. But he's never... The other thing that's fascinating, and I've argued this with people in private conversations when they refuse to keep their discussion in the public side. I'm here for public discourse, folks. Pin on the corkboard. As you listen to my podcast, which I humbly invite you to do before you bring in any argument at me, because it'll save yourself a lot of time and a lot of potential embarrassment, because you'll be caught like literally trying to pin on me things I've never said, never have endorsed. I've never voted for Biden. I've never blindly defended Biden. I've never blindly defended any politician in either party. The only time I defended anybody who is a politician is when I've defended them as a person because a group of others are coming at them and at their humanity, at the disregard of the policies in question. And I stand by that, right? When people jumped down Obama's throat with blatant racism, I stood up for that and I said, sorry, that's an irrational and illogical and irrelevant political argument. Get GTFO with that, because that's just dog whistle-y racist malarkey, right? And I'll do the same for anybody. I'll defend women who are politicians in either party when people have only chauvinist, sexist, bigoted talking points against them. I'll stand by that. Pin on the corkboard. It ain't nothing new, right? This has been a theme woven throughout my podcast because it's been an issue in our society at every level throughout since I've been conscious and aware and observing it and questioning it, which, as far as my personal opinion formulation goes and my rationale and my ability to observe and cite things that I know happen to be fact, goes as far back as when Ronald Reagan was in office. I'm no Johnny-come-lately. Neither am I some old boomer that does not understand the internet. I've been an early adopter, or at least a concurrent user of like mostly the cutting edge of stuff on the internet most of the time, except for when it was too expensive for to be easily at my disposal. That just like, if you're gonna come at me, just know that I've heard it all before, bro. So if I literally say to someone, bro, you're not saying anything original, it's not because I've got nothing else to say. It's because they're literally regurgitating stuff I've heard 1,000 times, because I've been on the internet since the internet's been available. And that started long before AOL existed. I just need to say that every once in a while, and I'm just putting it in this episode because it's like, please understand that. Be advised. You have been warned. Okay. The madness that we are currently still living through cannot be defended. And so people currently busy doing that, anybody who's on the other side of it, please just like make sure you skewer them with the fact that they are struggling and bending over backwards to justify criminal fraud. Stock market manipulation is not the norm. Is it something that corrupt players in Wall Street have done generation after generation? Of course. Does that make it okay? Absolutely not. Has it always been a tug of war in terms of how the marketplace is used at a moral analysis? Absolutely. I'm not denying that. What I'm saying is there is no excuse. There is no way you can get me to agree to the logic being presented. And just get over it, bro. It's fine. No, it's not fine. It is not fine. And it is disqualifying from any seat of political office at any level in any state, and most especially, I should believe to be correct. And we should stand united regardless of political affiliation or opinion or preference at this moment in time, that it must be called out for what it is and held to account. They just ran the most obvious, blatant color by the numbers stock manipulation, and call it whatever you want. There's people calling it by various known and sometimes slightly more obscure nicknames or labels, but it's the tariffs served only one purpose, and if they continue to do this repeatedly, the question becomes, again, as always, as I have struggled to explain to people, especially those who come at me with the weaponized false accusation. None of this is about anger or hate. It's about looking at what's going on with clear eyes and going, this is unconscionable, this is disagreeable, this is not what America is supposed to be about, no matter how you slice it. And I cannot stand by and be coerced into bending the knee otherwise, because that's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. And I, as someone that's, stepping up to a microphone and going, here's what I got to say about the world, or at least the limited part of it that I'm able to observe. I don't pretend to know everything. I don't pretend to know that which I do not know. I never have, never do. But I do assert with confidence that which I've seen enough to think I comprehend what's going on here. And the timelines on his tweets, or whatever they call them over on Truth Social, his posts on social media in general, his own language, and those of us who were previously prepared to warn anyone who was considering giving him their vote and their political praise and their political support. We said this from day one. The guy does not have a very confidence-inspiring track record. And it's, again, not about it's nothing personal. But I was willing to take into consideration the facts that are available as a matter of public record, in court record, right? Not hearsay, not the spin about it, not any news channel, not particular outlet's opinion, or not any particular influencer who endorses or detracts from him, but my own consideration of what is publicly available information that comes from and is found and verified in court record, which gives me some. And I know. There's all kinds of arguments for not taking that as seriously as all that, but at the same time, do we not find ourselves in the system that we find ourselves in? That is supposed to be the place where the facts are the facts. And it just so happens, for better or worse, no matter how you slice it, Trump's court record does not support any of the insane, crazy claims he makes about himself in any way, shape, or form. Trump's previous record in court before he ever stepped foot in office, before he ever rode the golden escalator down into the lobby of Trump Tower, his own words and actions in court as part of the record, and in the media, as much as you can rely on that, which people have different varying degrees of it's unreliable, and it is reliable with discernment, and it is 100% made up. So who knows? It's hard. I'm not going to convince anyone out of their current lane, probably. And I'm a sort of I'm an optimist in as much as that I think that there's a certain percentage of journalism that is actually still just journalism, right? And that there's bad apples, as it were, abound, and we need to hold everything. But I'm not partisan in my regards to what needs to be investigated and held to account. But I also am not susceptible to weaponized false accusations when they're patently, obviously false and weaponized. And the shenanigans of a witch trial, when it's when coming from someone who calls everything and anything that dares to question his opinion, let alone his claims of statements of fact, and his actions. When someone makes that much noise and accuses every possible form of scrutiny as a witch trial and plays the victim that hard, but the moment they have the tools at hand and the levers of power at their disposal, goes and begins to escalate and activate the very acts that they deny are, as I posted just recently, if he is not a tyrant, why does he keep doing exponentially more tyrannical, un-American, unconstitutional, I forget the order I put it in, but that's essentially what I posted. Why does he keep doing things that make it sound like he is, in other words? I'm asking the question, how can anyone continue to blindly defend this? The guy was a pretty unsupportable person to begin with. Patently unqualified for political leadership. Not if we're going to take political leadership serious. And mind you, I have a whole history of where I was in terms of the debate. Political debate prior to the introduction of this bull in a China store that is Donald Trump. And at that time, the debate was radically different. And I mean that in just a simple sense that Trump's escalation of absurdity, because it is, everything he does is patently, in my humble opinion, and people can disagree with me and or take it however they want, but it's not hate. It's just, as an observer, and I've been observing politics, asking why is it so weird sometimes? And why is it when it's actually working, it's so mundane that people can't bear, don't want it to stay there, don't want it to be successful in that way. People can't bear it when the political system is like actually efficiently functioning in that benign and banal way. That it is, I think, theoretically, what many of us who are attempting to engage in it in a and I don't like that term anymore because it's been polluted so much, but in a way that progressively improves it, an improvement being something that is beneficial to the mutuality of everyone. Like, we the people is all of us who are here in this place and bound by the community agreement that And, we can call it the end user license agreement or the terms of service of this community of many communities. Now, we can have a nuanced debate about which approach is better. And we can have a nuanced debate about transcending that. That's been my perspective since the get-go. I've been asking since Ronald Reagan was in office, why is the two-party polemic, this tug of war, why is that the default, and why is that considered the norm when it's so clear to me as an observer in the immediate term, the short term, the medium term, the long term, and the generations over time term, an honest review of its efficacy. Never mind efficiency. Let's talk about efficacy. Don't know what that word is? That means you need to buy a really good dictionary. And that's not a slam. That's not an insult. That's a genuine thumbs up. No one's paying me. There's no big dictionary or big encyclopedia giving me money. Although if there were, I'd feature a word of the day and an anti-word of the day, like the opposite, the antithesis of the word of the day, and some synonym. Like, I'd do a whole dictionary thing because I'm a fan. The moment I discovered it as a book, I was like, this is amazing. Does everyone know about this? Has everyone read it from cover to cover? Because I think that should be done. But of course, I felt that way because to me, this language is bizarre and mighty and powerful and meaningful. And words themselves, I transcend this language to all languages because I have no preference over one or the other. This is just the one I have burned into my brain since getting stranded here. I would love to learn other languages. That could be a whole special series. But I don't know where to start, and I would probably want to start with like, what's the best app for learning a language that's free that I could feature on the live stream? And that's a whole complicated legal issue, especially now that since they've killed off their bird. I think they are the best one to use, right? But do they still exist? What happened with the owl? I don't get it. Duolingo, what's going on? Don't anybody sue me for using that language. What do you call it? That intellectual property name. But I digress. Oh my God, so many people need to buy a dictionary and really read it. And I don't mean that in a snobby, like, I've been called so many names, but if we're going to have successful, meaningful public discourse across the multitude of concerns, issues, problems, dilemmas, and situations that we find ourselves in, meaningful, and by that I mean meaningful in that it renders not oppositional conflict and escalation of tensions to the point where it becomes inevitable that there must be some denouement, which people think is the only way to resolve things. Call me crazy, but there's an argument for a pacifist approach to, like, instead of just blowing up in front of each other and bashing our faces into that brick wall of mutual self-destruction, we could be stepping away from the ideologies that have proliferated up until now, because any sane analysis of them clearly shows it is these made-up mental constructs that create the conflict everyone's lining up on sides about, right? It's the ideology, dum-dum, to borrow and misaliterate, as I like to call it, when someone is referencing someone else's quote but totally saying something else. I like to do that. I forget. Insert correct authors and public speaker's name here. He's famous. He's that really terse and sour, increasingly like funky and eccentric, bitter old man that has been in politics forever, who's technically a Democrat, but he's also like one of the harshest critics of the Democratic Party, that is blatantly like, I love you guys, but also you're doing it all wrong kind of guy. Is it Orville? Carville? Schmarvel, something like that. We should come up with a fun fictionalization of his name. But he, many, many, many moons ago, once uttered in what I must presume, given what I don't quite remember of the story, some sort of perplexed frustration that it wasn't clear and obvious to everyone else involved in whatever discussion that this happened in. But it's the economy, stupid, right? There was some sort of strategic discussion about politics and some upcoming election, and like what the right set of tactics would be to garner the momentum, as they talk about, to harness the momentum into the election booth so that people actually turn out and actually render their votes in support of so-and-so and whoever it was. And they were all flummoxed, apparently. And he was, I feel, I may be over summarizing the story. I heard the story forever ago and I didn't recently refresh my mind on it, but he's famous and infamous for having said that, and it's been paraphrased and referenced and repackaged. I'm not the first to do it, and I've already forgotten what I just said. So clip that and go back far enough to capture whatever it was. But it's the ideological constructs, yo. It's not anything else. And the ideological constructs are all designed to be like, you are righteous and true, and everybody else who disagrees with you and who disagrees with whoever, insert an ideologue here, they must be evil, not just wrong, not just foolishly mistaken about this collection of concepts, but just brazenly, malevolently, demonically evil. And I'm sorry to break it to folks, especially anybody over there who's really caught up in that kind of narrative. But that all is the oldest historically recognized, like observed and assessed and analyzed and dissected and debunked form of us versus them ideological, psychological manipulation. Right? If your political rhetoric leads yourself down the path of, and so therefore the political opposition to yourself or to your party or to your party's leadership must be demonic. I'm sorry. But, you know, people have been doing that to each other since before Christianity existed. And we live in a time when the very notion of such things has been quite solidly knocked off the validity totem pole. There's plenty of reasons we can discuss why it's incredibly unlikely that specifically, mind you, I'm speaking of the politicized, weaponized version of hell and its army of demon spawn likely does not exist in any meaningful way. The fact that such arguments have been used to motivate, manipulate, control, and oppress communities of people for millennia, since long before the events that are attributed to this personage that we call Jesus Christ. And pin on the corkboard, I have a whole nuanced thing about that whatever your assumptions are in either direction, you're probably off quite a bit, unless you've been following along and paying a lot of attention, because it has not been in the forefront of everything, but it's there, especially in the podcast, especially in explicit and unauthorized readings. And especially whenever I criticize the misappropriation and misuse of Christian imagery and literature by those who are purposefully and consciously choosing to behave in the most egregiously un-Christ-like ways imaginable. And so, yeah, don't come at me until you've truly comprehended my position, it isn't what any of the default assumptions usually are. My criticism of politics is not about hate, just like my criticism of religion isn't about the people who believe, nor of the belief itself, nor of the traditions involved, but rather of what the organizations have become and what the organizations have seemingly done that is not so in line with the more sublime and beautiful teachings. And specifically, for me, in my case, this is reserved primarily for the multitude of Christian flavors, or denominations as they call themselves, because that's been the primary zone of my lived experience. Pain on the corkboard, it's been discussed many times, and I'm sure we'll come full circle and discuss it again. I'm not trying to get sidebarred here, but I digress. Just be advised that if you're going to come at me with assumptions, you're probably going to be incorrect. Because most people's assumptions about where I actually think and stand on these concerns is flawed at best. And I'm trying to make myself clear, and that's the funny part. So, hello and welcome to the show. I humbly invite you to consider this to be a chaotically disorganized yet inherently interconnected and not so impossible to follow spirally set of thoughtful thought experiments in time disassociated public discourse. I'm inviting you to check out my podcast here and on whatever platforms makes most sense to you, and to then respond to it. Now, the place that it's easiest for me to respond to your comments is either the Facebook page for the Almost Daily podcast, which has its own its own instance of each episode as a post, where you can then just drop your comments directly to it, whether or not that's where you listened to the episode. And also serves as a platform to make just a broader comment by dropping your comments directly on the page. And or the Sprecher platform, where the audio-only iteration of the show is hosted, where you can get to a specific episode on a specific show list, and listen to that and comment as you go along. And there, it'll be easy for me to identify and respond. All your thoughts, questions, concerns, reactions, and yes, even potshots, trolls, and nonsense, prefabricated stuff is welcome, mostly because I can't avoid it if you're just someone who's going to come at me with boilerplate stuff. It's bound to happen, so I might as well embrace it. The same is true over on the book series, because the book series, in a way, references as a working MacGuffin all of the podcast and live streaming content, as if it were something that was part and parcel of an archive from a long forgotten ancient past. Which will make sense once you start reading the book series and you understand that it's set in some dystopian distant future. Okay, let's talk about our present moment. Stock market manipulation aside, the aforementioned criminal exploration of how to get away with things seems to be the easiest way to explore or to define this second administration's theme. And despite all the apologists and denialists' attempt, his own pattern of language, which tragically I do not have a cool ready-to-play audio sampling of all his instances, but I assure you it is there, and it can. And if no one's out there done it, it can be created based on any collection of real previously live, based on the entire internet's archive of everything he said that is actually him saying it. And please be advised, there are indeed instances of some obvious and glaringly hard to take seriously AI videos of him saying stuff or AI recordings of him saying stuff. But to the best of my knowledge, my opinion, my assessment of him as a politician is based entirely on things that is verifiably authentic, because they were live when they happened, right? And I did my best effort. I always do my best effort to try to catch him live. When he's live on all the different channels, so you can flip back and forth between all the way from Fox to C-SPAN and everything in between. You know that it's live and at least being presented as such. How do I prove to you now that I'm live, except by responding to live chat, right, in a real and meaningful way? Currently, no one's chatting. You're welcome to chat, but apparently this will be a chat-free episode. That's fine. Sometimes chat is just a huge distraction. But I digress. Let's do a quick TikTok roll call. Nobody knew. That's fine. Nobody's new. We have more viewers in the total views column, but no one's name shows up, which I don't understand how that works. And I'm not going to pretend to understand how that works. Let's get back to the subject. There's a funny thing that's going on, right? There's this juxtaposition. They are, in many people's minds, truly, apparently, fighting corruption, fighting fraud. Now, in a lot of those people's minds, there's been no need for actual evidence of that fraud. As long as they keep saying that it's happening over and over again, they're satisfied and therefore confident to continue blindly defending the administration, no matter what other actions they take. Now, that's deeply problematic, right? Because according to what America is supposed to be, that's patently the most un-American way to call yourself a patriot. I've said this before, and I hate to have to drop it here and say it again, but the blind faith belief and support and following orders of one patently obvious corrupt politician is the opposite of what patriotism is supposed to be. It is the most un-American thing an American can choose to do. It is, like, ridiculously, as someone else put it in a meme that I shared, servile. And again, buy a dictionary. I say that with as much compassion and love. I know what it's like to be thrown a word that you don't understand. And the only solution is to buy a dictionary instead of pretending that it doesn't matter. Because you're just going to make a fool of yourself if you pretend words don't matter. Words matter, yo. And when you don't know what the word is, there's no shame. Just get a dictionary. Pull it out, look it up, read it. You don't want to be servile. Blind faith loyalty to any politician, even if they are not necessarily corrupt, is not what I think the Constitution is about. It's not what patriotism is about. It's not what the Founding Fathers were about. And to pretend it is in and of itself some betrayal of the idea and the ideals as represented in the oaths that are taken. Now, I'm no statist, which curiously I occasionally get accused of. But as always, like if you're coming at me with accusations and you have never taken the time to investigate my content, which I've made a conscious effort of presenting in what I hope to be an interesting and curiosity stimulating and unusual and novel and experimental format, which perhaps may not be everyone's cup of tea. But if you're just projecting stereotypical talking points, you're not being fair to yourself and you're not being fair to me. And I would rather we engage in very serious public discourse of what we actually have to confront with as a collective. Because no matter how you slice it, when you set aside the bluster and the sportsmanlike trash talking and confrontational. How do you conjugate this? There's an inherent confrontationalism. Oh, interesting. That isn't the logo, though. Okay, sorry, I got distracted by that. Let me get rid of this on TikTok side of the world because it's egregiously right in my eye. I need to change that. I need to rework this entire graphics loader, and I'm sorry to everybody on all ends of the output for the distractions. I digress. My concern is anchored in a perspective that honestly is beyond the scope, the limitations of the tug-of-war treadmill echo chamber that most people who are attempting to intellectually joust with me in chat or on social media are coming from. And that pisses them off because then they don't have the patience for it. They want the satisfaction, it would seem, from this perspective. They want the satisfaction of owning the opposition, but only in the framework of the tug of war between the new right and the old left, which doesn't make any sense to me, honestly, friends. And so I want to be overt for anyone who's finally coming through to listen. Before you dive deep into the show, and I encourage you to go over to Sprecher.com, or if you're feeling very diverse, go to solo.to first and explore all the different things. Not all of it will be what you're looking for, right? Some people may not be interested at all with my cheesy, not terribly great original sketch work, which was part of an ambitious, longer-term project that kind of I packaged up and put on the shelf of trying to sketch a little bit almost every day to try to improve my drawing skills. Some people may not want to read the book series. That's fine. Some people just want to argue the politics, in which case, go straight to Good Morning Trumptopia. But don't forget to couple that with unauthorized and explicit readings, because whether or not it's obvious at first, they go hand in hand, and all of it is interconnected. So let me clarify some people's misconstrued, incorrect presumptions about me. I'm not here to defend or to argue in favor of any political ideology. I've literally been standing off to the side going, can we question all the ideology, please? Because it's ironic to me that a lot of people are entrenched in a political ideological camp, simultaneously waving the banner question everything, but in a weird way that doesn't make sense to me until you realize that it's all capable of being boiled down to sort of a fundamental ego attraction to fascism, because it's very egocentric and ego-inflating and ego-satisfying. And so it doesn't really matter which political ideology you think is the righteous and true. If we don't attend to a deeper issue, all of it is at risk of being corrupted by the same corruptive influence, right? And that's a conversation that a lot of people who are engaged in and entertained by the sport that is political public jousting, as opposed to solution-oriented public discourse. I'm trying to create a little wedge. Like some separation maneuvers are there to create clarity, not division. Not everything is about being divisive, right? Sometimes we do need to create a space in order to delineate and facilitate the comprehension of what that space represents. Otherwise, we'll just keep ignoring it. And there is such a space, or such a mode of public, civic, political engagement beyond just the discourse, but also the duty and the manifestation of policy and beyond, where we can be non-toxic, non-divisive, non-confrontational, and instead focused on collaborative, pragmatic, solution-based systems that actually provide for the needs of the people. Otherwise, what are we doing? Besides repeating the rhyming riffs of history over and over and over again. And before you jump into any conclusions about why I'm motivated to bring these questions that I do, please try just taking the time to think about the questions that I offer. I'm not here to get any blind faith followers in any way, shape, or form. I'm here to add my curious, and I don't think all that strange or foreign line of reasoning to the public discourse. There must be others who think along similar lines, and there must be others for which this line of reasoning is not offensive or crazy or intimidating, but sort of like, oh, yes, aha, yes, and thank you, more of that, please. And I think it's pretty straightforward, right? A clear and honest look at history will render certain conclusions with enough thought and consensus building. Because I mean this in the public discourse kind of way. There's multiple modes of thinking, and a person can think deep, big, great thoughts. But for so as long as they are thinking on their own in isolation and not comparing and contrasting their thoughts, especially those thoughts along socio-political, economic, ideological lines, they're never going to get the feedback of others who may be negatively impacted by those thoughts. And we need to address those concerns in a way that it is meaningfully pragmatic and solves that in order to avoid, reduce, and completely re-engineer negative outcomes for anybody so that we do not have them, right? Otherwise, what the F are we doing? What's the point of society if it isn't to provide for those of us who make up that society in some way, shape, or form or another, right? In its fullest spectrum, and not just those born into the position of the most elite financial leverage. Call me crazy. But I stand by what I've said, and so I welcome public discourse. But I feel compelled to say it over and over and over again before you come at me, brah, especially with boilerplate, regurgitated, scripted, weaponized false accusations based on projections that have nothing to do with what I'm actually saying. You might consider investing the time and finding out what I've actually said. And to what end? Because I do have a goal in mind, and it isn't what most people get angrily project and accuse me of doing. Especially when they're just blindly foaming at the mouth accusing me of stuff. I've had some wild and unhinged conversations where people have accused me of the most outrageously, where are you getting this from? It's got nothing to do with anything I've ever said or done in my public life or in my personal life. And that kind of behavior is what brings about the level of dehumanizing chaos that allows for the most frightening of egregious and inhumane public actions as we look back through history, right? We must not forget I think, if I may humbly propose the following, we must not forget that anybody is capable, ultimately, in my humble opinion, everyone being interrelated and of cut of the same cloth, lest we start to fall into us versus them, exclusionary, isolationist, elitist thinking. We're all one big family. We are genetically nearly 100% identical. Right? Go look up that number. It's a mind-boggling number of nines after a 99.9, and it's ad nauseum number of nines. And it's an irrefutable, verifiable, scientific, measurable thing. It is a tragedy that there are people who are comforted by the ability to refuse to concede that as a piece of knowledge and prefer to believe in the fantasy that is an untrue thing. But it's a very it's a very real thing, right? Like once we maybe integrate that into our comprehension of ourselves and each other, we might be capable of seeing one another as one another, which is what almost every major spiritual teaching in the, historical record of like these things became important historical teachings has some variation or flavor or element or ingredient of that teaching in it, except for those in which there are some who did not, and or from which it was erased. But what does that even mean to comprehend that? To come to the understanding that we've always been each other, as different as we are, and as insufferable as we can be to one another and one another's preferences or parameters, that deep down, that which we consider ourselves, the core of ourselves, is quixotically in a quantum mechanical, spiritual, metaphysical, esoteric kind of way, the same mystical, magical, difficult to pin down, etheric thing, whatever that is, right? Therefore, we must come to certain conclusions, I suggest, including the one that motivates me to A, refuse to bend the knee, but also B, refuse to regurgitate the outrage that mirrors that which is egregious on the side of that which I oppose, right? I've said this before and I'll say it again. And I'll have to say it again. Forgive me for sounding like a broken record. But anyone who considers themselves the opposition to a tyranny must also restrain themselves, in all honesty, from stooping as low as the tyranny that they oppose, lest they become nothing more than that next tyranny. And I'm deeply concerned because I have been prompted to have to literally say that to folks on social media, and to have to type that kind of sentiment, that idea, in some construction or another out. And there are plenty of people out there who will be like, oh man, you're over exaggerating, you're hyping things up, and you're making mountains out of molehills. And I'm like, am I? Or are we to take the person who's currently disabusing the very levers and mechanics of power in this country that we used to criticize other politicians for appearing to abuse or use corruptly? Right? Like what? I've never understood why people are so gravitated to him. Many theories have come about, and there's memes and everything, And I'm still, having considered the ones I've come across, I'm still not entirely sure that they satisfy my question. And I must continue to ask it. Except for those out there who have a financial or greed-based, because greed can be applied to finance and or just blatant raw power, which is an ethereal, intangible thing. Like a vested interest in being a sycophant and being an enabler. But I don't know those people personally. And until I get some sort of fantasy investment magically at my disposal, I probably won't be able to fly out there to but boy, do I wish I could. I'd love to ask these sworn officers of public service how it is they continue to behave in ways that violate the oaths that they have taken, right? I've never been a blind faith compliant, bend the knee to any government kind of person, and thus I cannot bend the knee and suddenly become a blind faith subscriber to the Trumpopian interpretation of what that collection of movements are attempting to mutate the American government into. To me, it's ridiculous that a vast majority of those who are busy willfully bending over backwards to defend this individual and the cacophony of hangers-on and sycophants around him, and those that we do not even know who might be lurking in the background, in the shadows, in the positions of real power, when they're willfully being so blatantly unconstitutional about it all. And un-Christ-like. And I stand by that. I will continue to stand by that, regardless of how much attempts at intimidating or bullying. That's nonsense. If Christ were sitting next to me as the co-host of this show, I can assure you that based on my lifetime's worth of curiosity and earnest, humble exploration of everybody's interpretation of the Christ story, the most plausible, the most believable, the most potentially true iteration or interpretation of it all would lead me to conclude that if the real, actual Christ, the Yeshua, that spoke the words in Aramaic that I read translated into English, he would be sitting here next to me, ready to flip tables, hopefully not mine, because mine have all my stuff on it, but ready to flip somebody's tables over and be like, no, this is unacceptable. Not just because I say, because it just violates the sanctity of human rights and human liberties and human humaneness. If anything can be said about the person we call Jesus, is that he believed in humanity, not in whatever ideological nonsense is being peddled in his name today, right? The first thing he would do is flip over any vendor selling Rambo Jesus paraphernalia. He'd be like, what are you selling this garbage in my name when this is not at all what I taught? Now, we can get into a debate about what he did or did not teach according to what is being said by preachers in giant megachurches today versus what is in the text, as we can find the oldest iterations of these stories, which go back deeper than most of the King James derived iterations. So there's a whole cognitive dissonance and cultural shock waiting for anybody who has created a personal identity around the political, ideological, politicized especially here in the United States, identities of being a so-called Christian in any of its new variations. It's post, let us say, post witch trials iterations. It's a tragedy at a global scale because, I mean, as far back as the Roman Empire integrating their interpretation of Christianity into the Roman Empire, it was all misuse of the mythology that had developed around these teachings, and it was all a distraction from the authentic teachings of transcendent healing through various arguably esoteric practices. But again, a big discussion that a lot of people aren't ready for, and that I've already explored in various ways in various episodes. And I humbly invite you to explore for yourself at your own pace by diving into my podcast project of many podcasts. Links available at solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. If you're new here, thank you for joining me. I'm not mindlessly rejecting Trump and Trumptopian movement and the ideology that is being juggled therein. I have plenty of well thought out reasons for rejecting it personally and for asking, how can anyone bend the knee to this? How can anyone subscribe to this? How can anyone take on this ideological construct that blinders you so and is so patently manipulative and based on a whole train wreck worth of half-truths, patently false things that have been proven over and over and over and over again to be patently false, and everything you can imagine of combining the truth with half-truths and full nonsense and just made up statements, and all of it bundled, no matter how much some portion of the coalition ignores this, bundled with the incredibly outrageous and un-Christ-like notion that Christ himself is defending this egregiously egomaniacal, unrighteous, untruthful, self-sanctimonious, self-aggrandizing, greedy, corrupt, fraudulent individual, right? To me, that's an egregious insult to that which is the actual Christ. Yeshua Christos is turning over in his grave if he were in it, right? And it's even an insult to the cartoon, whitewashed, blonde-haired, blue-eyed iteration of Christ. It's beyond the pale. It has gone beyond the parameters of the previous patently obvious hypocrisy of the general default level of hypocrisy that could be criticized before he arrived on the scene. And that's why I can only continue to ask, how can anybody gaslight themselves when it's so clear and it's so obvious that with these running a multi-tiered, multi-product cult of personality, pseudo-religious, corrupt political scam that is lining his own and his billionaire oligarch supporter buddies' pockets, whilst literally, explicitly ripping off through too many ways to list off, but ranging from those horrible gold lame shoes to the egregiously insulting and patently blasphemous Donald Trump's signature Bibles to the virtual electronic coin scam to everything that Doge is being exposed of doing. Like, the facts are explicit. And the hypocrisy of half of it, if not most of it, is stuff that either Trump himself or the overall community, the same chorus of voices that used to be the Tea Party and has become part of MAGA, or that was part QAnon, or both, that used to say this is what's evil and wrong about the Democratic Party before they built up all the way to straight legit Satan spawn, right? They've gotten so deep into the Satan spawn Kool-Aid, they've forgotten that they were literally once angry and outraged at the fact that these things are what the blatant weaponized accusations against all Democrats were, regardless of whether or not there was any evidence to support it. Some Democrats, indeed, have been caught and exposed for this kind of egregious financial confidence fraud, right? Or whatever, however you want to analyze it, however you want to label it. Similar and different kinds of disenfranchisement of their own supporters and followers has been exposed on both sides of the two-party aisle. There's no denying that. That does not excuse. I cannot believe that there are voices out there trying to rationally normalize. This is okay. This is just the way rich people get rich. You should be outraged because hasn't part of your whole spiel been up until now that rich people shouldn't, that certain corporations shouldn't be allowed to profiteer on us that way? Oh, but rich, there's always been this hypocrisy, this tension, right? Especially once you embed the whole thing in some sort of delusional, self-delusional, gaslighting, deeply us versus them, indoctrinating mockery of what Christ taught, of what Christ actually taught. Christ never, ever, to the best of my knowledge, and I was once a self-proclaimed Bible thumper in my own camp and flavor and variety of Americanized Christianity, and then I jumped around to various others because I had to try on the different hats to try to figure them out. So I don't come at this from some made-up place that I've been accused of. I come at this from the place of like, oh wow, the more I try to be a good Christian, the more I realize that this is not what we're being led to become. I asked the kind of questions very early on that led me to be like, I need to step away from this because I cannot be part of this ongoing misuse and misapplication of what I had come to understand at that time. And at that time, my understanding of it was still at a level that was clearly, brutally, racially whitewashed, historically stripped of some of its more egregious components, and riddled with indoctrination that was in opposition to the central themes of the very man's actual teachings of turning the other cheek, loving your neighbor as yourself. There's a reason why the statement is love your neighbor as yourself, right? They've requantified, repackaged, reanalyzed that whole parable into unrecognizable territory that is blasphemy in and of itself, I would argue, as someone that used to have to juggle and contend with the very notion of what would be a blasphemous interpretation of the things that we're being taught and conditioned to accept. As a rebel, I'm here not to entirely denounce it all, but to question that which the organization has become in contrast with what we can academically and verifiably identify as the oldest known possible interpretations of the teachings of the person we refer to with this colloquialism, this derivative name, Jesus Christ. For that was not the person's real name. And there's a bunch of theories as to how we got to that and what it means and all that. And we don't need to get bogged down in that discussion now. But my point being, those teachings, I mean, I challenge anybody, especially anybody wearing a MAGA hat and supporting this guy unconditionally with absolute blind faith, because it's the part that really chaps my hide fundamentally is that to do that with this guy, to pledge your allegiance to him individually, his whims, his words, his dictates, his egregious greed and obvious pandering to those who are also worshipers of greed is the patently, it's patently and mind-bogglingly, painfully unpatriotic, un-American, unconstitutional, and un-Christ-like, to the best of my understanding of all those terms. And I have yet to see anyone produce a convincing argument somehow managing to talk me into accepting that it is not. Because the outcomes continue to be what they are, and the outcomes are not, in my opinion, what we are hoping for or expecting out of genuinely patriotic, genuinely constitutional, and yes, even Christ-like, if we can understand that Christ would support and endorse and comply with a separation of church and state. There is a way to bring Christ-like behavior into government without bringing the mindless rhetoric that is in and of itself hypocritical and in contradiction to Christ's teachings. Christ himself, I think, would have argued in favor of separation of church and state. Pin on the corkboard. I've already sort of lingered on that analysis before, and we'll have to do another podcast about it in the not too distant future. Having said all that, friends, I remind you yet again that my proposed solutions start with the inherently, I think for some people, controversial statement that regardless of religious affiliation, in order to confront this as Americans, right, as members of the American experiment, as members of the American society as a whole, regardless of political affiliation prior to this, regardless of religious affiliation prior to this and moving forward, we must attempt to bring as much Christ-like compassion, forgiveness, and love to this equation as humanly possible. And here is why. And I bring this episode as we reboot and re-engineer and reinvent this podcast. It's been a theme throughout, but I don't know that people have apparently missed it. I'm sure most of the people that come at me that way just have never bothered. But I want to make sure that it is blatant and clear right here in this episode. And I'll leave it for you as the final thought. We are all one collective family, brothers and sisters in humanity, right? Setting aside my cosplay as a robot from another dimension sent here to warn you about all this from an outside perspective. Let me speak to it from an internal perspective, right? We are all genetically identical to a certain degree, to the degree that is healthy, and we are all, thus, genetically speaking, members of one collective family. No matter how different, no matter how distant the genetic relationship may be. And metaphysically, spiritually, that has impact beyond the challenge to the socio-political ideological questions. And it is meaningfulness in the following fashion. We all share the same capacity to abdicate and transcend all ideology in the way in which both Christ and the Buddha suggested, in order to once more reconnect, reaffirm, and be reconsecrated by not some crazy person's interpretation of what was lost as we distance ourselves from the original words in their original languages. But the natural organic phenomena of communing with our internal living bio-spiritual connection to that divine consciousness that was being invoked and about which the healing was focused in all of the healing practices that became spiritual traditions, that then became religious institutions, that became the monoliths we see, the not so monolithic monoliths, the cacophony of religious institutions in its various forms and expressions that range in their complexity from blatantly insane. And I'm looking at anybody that's like jerking off to real guns with real ammo in their ceremonies. That to me is sick and wrong and deeply, 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 deep. Not just what's the word I'm looking for? Sacrilegious and heretical and insert all the synonyms here from religion. Like that is sacrilege and heresy and deeply, deeply, deeply just morally, spiritually, egregiously unchristlike, right? The fact that there are banners with a Christ figure dressed up like a Rambo cosplay is just phenomenologically, like just phenomenal. I didn't mean to throw down phenomenological. At a phenomenological level, I can assert to you that Christ, the actual Christ, and the actual true teachings of Christ are onto something that is bigger and deeper and way more important than all the nonsense that, especially here in America, deluded, gaslit, manipulated, hateful Christians, and I mean to distinguish them from those who are like onto a more or less toxic version of it, because there's all kinds. There's totally hippy dippy New Age Christians that are like, yeah, man, we're supposed to be communing with nature on a entheogenic journey to see the mother spirit and to reintegrate Christ's, so it's everywhere. The spectrum of all of that is truly broad, but there are definitely those who have decided for their own, usually greed-based purposes, to twist and invert and pervert and destroy whatever iteration they got their hands on and make it worse. Because we can go way back in history, and the argument of where the real, raw, and original utterances may have been, it's a complicated discussion. And the vast majority of people who think they know something have been desperately misled, because there's a whole freaking industry, and there has been a monetized for-profit industry of misleading people when it comes to a whole cornucopia of different fantasies of what Jesus really represents you can pick from, right? From the most benign and boring that are just iterations or variations stepping away from the Catholic doctrine that was sort of the predominant view for a long time, because it tried to take over the world, in its own crazy journey, separate from and in many ways irrelevant when it comes to what the person we're actually trying to identify with this name, Yeshua Christos, really, really, really taught. So it's a whole crazy debate, but I can assure you it's not that difficult to comprehend that no matter how you slice it, Jesus wasn't here to profiteer on the marketplace by lying about tariffs to his followers. So it makes no sense that so many people that are supposedly believers and followers and practitioners, supposedly, and I'm not seeing a lot of people practicing what I understand to be the actual authentic teachings of Christ, which included a yoga-like metaphysical, esoteric body practice that helped the mind clear away ego constructs that was arguably entheogenic in its at least it had an entheogenic component in its complexity or in its process. And there's a whole discussion. I'm fairly certain I've already done an episode about it before, but I'd love to come back, and we are in the right month to come back and do an episode again about it. Speaking of which, for those who consume Happy 420, although it isn't anywhere near that, and we just, it was 420 at the time I was getting ready to do this podcast. And save your crazy judgments. Thank you for all of you who tuned in to listen. I think I've said what I've got to say, and I will continue to say it, folks, as a message, not just to those who support the Trump administration and the complicated cacophony of different groups that have amalgamated into a movement behind him, which I have coined the term Trumptopia, or Trumptopian movement, which I again assert to you from the get-go was never intended to be a dismissive or pejorative or mean or rude or disrespectful term. It is a technical term the way Brazilian, well, that one's difficult because they do use that term for other things, but a person who is from Brazil is called a Brazilian. A person who believes in Trump and the confusing mix of ideologies that have become associated with him, for better or worse, he is what I consider a Trumptopian. And I say that simply as a way to distinguish from other things. And that's the way language works. And I hope that one day my term gets inducted into the dictionary, because I have reasons to believe that this movement currently has 60-40 odds of surviving whatever becomes of the rest of Trump's career and the rest of his natural lived life. And for the record, I have no ill will towards the man, and I pray to whatever divinity exists that he may live out his life as long and as full as the good Lord intended, and that may enlightenment and relaxed and grooviness and love may blossom in his heart, because fundamentally, the thing that people refuse to comprehend, and many people have tried to argue with me and they refuse to hear me when I say this, right? They accuse me of being a bunch of other things instead, which says a lot about them and nothing about me. I humbly believe that not only are we all part of a biologically and esoterically, metaphysically, spiritually interconnected and intra-connected family that is, the human species, but that when we are expressions of extreme qualities in one direction or the other, we are a sort of expression of the symptomologies of how healthy and how unhealthy we can be. The family being an expression of the multitude of configurations of all the different component pieces that make us up, right? So Trump, if we approach the phenomena that he has engendered by being himself, Trump, we can accuse or label him as many things, but I think the most humane, the most free from nonsensical ideology, and the most accurate is to say he is a warning sign, a symptomology of the deeply neglected, deeply embedded, deeply co-shared, because we all have a little bit of it, but he's got a lot more of it, causing him to be what he is. The trauma of the human species, the trauma of the human metaphysical soul, spirit, mind, and body that renders us to manifest the worst of our behaviors the way in which it feels like. Because everyone has this experience, no matter how good or how bad they appear to be on the outside, we've all been tempted to do the wrong thing. We've all confronted the choice of what is the right thing, what is the wrong thing, what is the neutral thing, what does any of it mean? And we've all fought our battles, and we've all failed and or succeeded to the range that we have and to the degree that we've lived enough to have lived the kind of experiences that bring about those kinds of very real moments, right? Those very real decisions, those very real, for lack of a better term, transcendental moments that have deep metaphysical impacts on others around us and practical, standard, basic physical impacts. So that's where I'm coming from. Like, he represents everything that needs to be healed in the species. If we ever intend to conduct our societies however we choose to organize them, and I'm not trying to preach or demand or insist or impose any construct in that department, right? Please take note of who currently is. I just think that's the wrong way to do it, friends. That doesn't mean I believe that they are some monolith of horror, but I do think that the impulse to try and do that stems from a globally shared, metaphysically significant, nuanced, subtle, and exponentially difficult to approach healing that we must all step up some way, shape, or form in a metaphysical, spiritual way to address and to heal within ourselves, and to, by doing so, empower those around us, each other, to do the same, cascading into a phenomena that allows the species to empower itself to heal itself in its entirety. Because I refuse, based on the evidence available to me, including the entirety of the broad scope of human history as we understand it. And yeah, it's flawed, and yeah, the winner's right, I get it. I'm not unaware of all the problems. But there's also the blatant, simple realities that no matter how you slice it, no matter what flaws there may be in the track record also includes all these fundamental, undeniable things. And that's it. We keep bashing our brains into the same kinds of ideological, ontological, imaginary brick walls in the name of imaginary figures or imaginary constructs or imaginary thematic talking points. In the name of imaginary things, we have brutalized ourselves and each other for generation after generation, and it has only propagated more pain and more suffering, and it has created the world that we live in. And the world that we live in is crazy complicated, and each particular circumstance has its own nuanced, complicated set of ongoing circumstances that have caused it or that continue to manifest it for certain. And I'm aware. I'm one of those people going, hey, yo. Absolutist thinking is rarely absolutely true, so let us not seduce ourselves into boiling each other down into absolute monoliths of this or that. Because not only is that often misinforming, misguiding because it's not accurate, isn't that also precisely, blatantly what the, quote, worst of the worst of us in history have always done? Isn't that what the bad guys that we're constantly comparing each other to are at fault for doing? We cannot stoop so low as to become the very evil that we accuse those perpetuating horrible things of being. Instead of accusing each other of being monoliths of evil, let's focus on finding the root causes of those traumas that have led those occupying those positions of power, by which they've been corrupted enough to allow themselves to enact these inhumane events on others, right? Whichever they are, whichever one you want to debate, because we're surrounded by them in this current chapter of human history. And we will probably continue to be for the foreseeable future. And I'm not here to impose any nonsense, and I don't pretend to know anything other than what I've gone through. And what I bring to the table is, I think that maybe, just maybe, we've been going about it all wrong. And that if we're serious about solving problems, we should maybe step away from using the tools we built these problems with and evaluating them. And the only way we can do that properly together across the board is if we globally, universally, let us say, agree to the alarmingly overwhelming and also underwhelming idea of setting them all aside together so that we can once again see each other clearly, having removed the goggles and the masks and the nonsense and the lies and the imaginary cages that filter and influence our ability to perceive ourselves and each other clearly. Because until we do that, I am deeply concerned that we'll just prefer to keep tugging each other's chains and yanking each other's, choking each other on the chains of the system as we are born into it. And we're all born into it, folks. The most ridiculous thing in the cacophony of argument in the United States is people regurgitating boilerplate talking points about how other people are the evil ones because they are blind faith sheeple indoctrinated in some nonsensical way. If your own ideology has got you outraged, foaming at the mouth, and blindly accusing others of being some unverifiable monolith of something more evil than is actually going on, and all you can do when questioned is accost them verbally and accuse them of being brainwashed, and who's the brainwashed? Americans accusing their fellow Americans of being brainwashed is like that Spider-Man meme of Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man, in my humble opinion. Now, I can only say this because it dawned on me at a very early age that I myself was surrounded by indoctrination, and I too had fallen for it, had incorporated into my thinking, and had to stop and go, whoa, why did I do that? Why am I hearing conditioned thinking coming out of my mouth when I don't like that, the idea of others speaking nonsensical, and it happened to me early on, and for some people it may only be happening for them now. But let me assure you, friends, anyone who takes a deep enough step back and inward and does an honest enough evaluation of self and observed shared reality must concede that every single last one of us, were raised in an unadulterated cacophonously noisy echo chamber of brainwashing, where the brainwashing was so normal it was celebrated. And sometimes celebrated and applauded and worn with pride. Right? Do you not see all around you how you're supposed to take pride in your identity, whatever it is, insert the identity you've been conditioned to take pride in. And then juxtapose that with the fact that pride is literally a very important item on the 7 deadly sins list, right? I'm not just trying to be cute. Everything is indoctrination. There's nothing that isn't. Language is a form of indoctrination. Just being able to communicate this is a cat and that is a tree is a form of indoctrination. that's crazy. I know. Call me crazy. I'm also not expressing any judgmental values of one form or another of conditioning. I'm just proposing that maybe that's part of the way we function. We practice things as a way to condition our own selves into being able to do them. No, very few people are just magically and inherently and innately pick up a thing and do it brilliantly well. Some motherfuckers seem to be gifted that way, and they don't need to train. But it's extremely rare, and I don't know that I still don't know that I believe blindly without going and seeing it for myself that they really did and or can learn a thing without some amount of practice. But my whole point is, like, there's nothing inherently wrong with learning a thing, right? But we've gotten to this crazy place where the echo chambers have conditioned ourselves everywhere to assume that no one else can be correct about anything because they aren't on your team. That's crazy. That's nonsense. That's straight up us versus them ideological conditioning malarkey. So if that's part and parcel and baked into anything, whatever, religious idea, political idea, cultural idea, socio idea, economical idea, whatever it is, if it's baked into that, if there's somewhere, anywhere in the construct that like, oh yeah, those people don't deserve any of this or don't because they're less than and we're going to separate ourselves in that fashion. I'm sorry. And that's it's like it's riddled everywhere. And if we want to fix that, for lack of a different term, if we want to fix that, and I humbly propose that like that might be the right thing to want altogether, regardless of where we were born and what cultural identity we were given or inherited or adapted or created for ourselves, because some people genuinely do and some people only pretend to. No matter what our individual context is, if we want to fix the real things that are actually wrong, and I guess this theoretically also applies to the made-up imaginary things that we only believe ideologically are wrong, because if we try it this way, at least that will expose that they are made up and not true, thus fixing them, right? Realize this, folks. If you believe that something that is so horrible that it seems almost insane is the reason for why everything is bad, and that belief turns out to be made up, fake, completely unverifiably, to the point where it cannot exist, then you shouldn't be mad. You should be relieved because you've effectively solved it. You've relieved yourself of the burden of thinking that is true and therefore out to distress you or out to impact you or out to hurt you. And there are some things like that I think that need to be exposed. And there are other things that we've just been in denial about that are fundamentally more boring but also more frightening than some of the crazy things we're arguing about that may or may not be a little bit true or some partially true or whatever. And to that end, friends, I invite you humbly to listen to more of my podcast and to join me on live streams on occasion to discuss those. So far, I thank those who watched and lurked around and did not say hi. And I hope that more and more people tune in the future. Until next time, I wish you the very best, and I hope that you are yourself willing to deeply consider the wild and wacky things that just came out of my mouth. I know that was a whirlwind of ideas, and we can go back and revisit them, and we will go back and revisit them. I intend to go back and revisit them in slightly differently organized ways in the not too distant future, which I hope you will find engaging. And for those kinds of things, I humbly invite your audienceship and your commentary. This is intended to be public discourse, not just me rambling and hoping people will listen. May peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your hearts, friends. And may you encounter that as an invitation to set aside the world and its constructs and its ideologies and its belief systems for just a minute. Not because they're evil or wrong, or not because they must be taken away from you by force, but because you are willingly, on your own terms, setting them aside for a hot minute, that you may delve deep inside yourself without them and experience that which is there for you to reunite with when you take those things and set them aside. Because that's the crux of the mysterious mystery teachings that have riddled human history, right? From my perspective, based on my journey of exploring them and questioning and experimenting. Because I am not intimidated by those who banter the F around and find out. You want to F around and find out? Then stop throwing nonsense talking points at me and follow me on the journey of exploring that which I'm inviting you to experiment with for yourself. Which includes crazy sounding things like, maybe you should go take an actual yoga class and do it like ongoingly. Maybe you should find for yourself a meditation vendor app that like makes sense to you and works for you and give it a try. You should shop for yourself meditation, audio tracks and whatnot, because that's one of many different ways which those who have been called healers have suggested the human species can investigate the mysteries of the internal portion of our experience, right? The internal, esoteric, difficult to describe with language, but undeniable phenomena that can be encountered when we look within, as opposed to constantly force our focus outwards. And I assure you, there's a there, and it's worthy of exploration. With as much cynicism and questioning everything as you can muster, by all means. But not with blatant denialism, because blatant denialism blinders you. And having said all that, friends, I bid you a fond farewell. Thank you for tuning in. This has been another real, raw, and radically unscripted episode of the Almost Daily Variety Zencast audio podcast talk show and content creation live stream extravaganza crossover event, connecting the Almost Daily Zencast and other podcasts that are usually produced and recorded over on Sprecher.com, and the live stream experience over on TikTok and Twitch. After a brief break, I'll be back to do something which may seem completely irrelevant. If it's not for you, don't participate. If it is for you, come on through, settle in, say hi, don't be shy. I'm all about the chit-chat. And with that, friends, I bring this episode to a close. Did I pick some music yet? I was going to pick some music. Let's go with this. Peace out, folks. Thank you for listening. We'll be back in a bit after a break.